The two men were in the middle of my grandfather's meadow, a place of profound peace and beauty, and they were committing an act of such breathtaking arrogance it was hard to process. One of them was unspooling a long yellow measuring tape. The other was shaking a can of bright orange spray paint, the little ball inside rattling like a rattlesnake's warning. They were trespassing, and they were preparing to deface my family's land. On the other side of the creek, on the manicured lawn of her own property, stood Brenda, the president of the Creekside Meadows Homeowners Association. She was barking orders at them through a bullhorn, directing their every move like a general commanding an invasion. I was on the porch of the old farmhouse, my heart hammering against my ribs, a sick feeling of helpless rage churning in my stomach. And then the screen door creaked open behind me. My grandfather, Arthur, stepped out. He didn't say a word to me. He was holding his old but immaculately maintained Winchester hunting rifle. He walked to the edge of the porch, his movements slow, deliberate, and utterly calm. He didn't raise the rifle. He just held it, resting comfortably in the crook of his arm, the dark, oiled walnut stock and the blued steel of the barrel gleaming in the afternoon sun. He looked out across the 100 yards of open pasture at the two men who were about to scar his land. He didn't shout, didn't scream. His voice when he spoke was not loud, but it was a voice of such profound, quiet authority that it seemed to cut right through the air, right through the bullhorn's blare. A sound that was more a part of the landscape than the wind itself. "You are trespassing," he said, his voice a calm, powerful rumble. "You have 10 seconds to get off my land." The two men froze. The can of spray paint stopped its rattling. Brenda's bullhorn fell silent. And in that sudden, shocking, and beautiful silence, a new kind of war began.
Ow.
And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment, that perfect, terrifying standoff between the old world and the new, you have to understand my grandfather, and you have to understand the land he has spent his entire life protecting. My name is Leo. I'm a student of architecture, a city kid. My world is a place of blueprints, of digital renderings, of a reality that can be shaped and reshaped with the click of a mouse. But this past summer, to help out after my grandmother's passing, I came to live with my grandfather, Arthur. And I entered a different world entirely. My grandfather is a man of a different time. He's a retired land surveyor, a lifelong hunter, a man who understands the world not through a screen, but through the soles of his worn leather boots. He's a man of precision, of principles, of quiet, unshakable convictions. His workshop is a museum of his life's work filled with old brass and steel transits, worn leather map cases, and hand-drawn topographical maps that are works of art in themselves. But to him, a property line is not a suggestion. It is a sacred, immutable fact. His property, our family's property for over a century, is a sprawling, beautiful 100-acre island of authentic rural life. It's a place of rolling pastures, of a rambling old farmhouse, of a clear, cold creek that meanders through a 10-acre hay meadow. The South Meadow, as my family has always called it, and for the last 20 years, this island of reality has been completely surrounded by a sea of beige, artificial perfection called Creekside Meadows. It's an exclusive gated community, a place where nature has been tamed, manicured, and forced into a state of sterile submission. We, of course, were not members of their HOA, and the self-appointed admiral of this beige sea was the HOA president, Brenda. Brenda was a woman who seemed to be powered by a mixture of profound insecurity and an equally profound sense of entitlement. She was a woman who believed her opinions were facts, and her desires were laws. Her multi-million-dollar McMansion, a monument of gaudy photoscon architecture, sat on a ridge that overlooked our property, and she had decided that the view of our wild, beautiful, the completely private South Meadow belonged to her. My first real interaction with her was a perfect introduction to her particular brand of madness. She showed up at our door, uninvited, her face a mask of polite concern that did a poor job of hiding her deep-seated disapproval. "Hello," she'd said, her eyes scanning past me to my grandfather, who was sitting in his armchair. "I'm Brenda, the president of the Creekside Meadows HOA. We, the board, have some serious concerns about your southern pasture." "The South Meadow?" my grandfather asked, his voice a quiet rumble. "Yes," she said. "It's so. Wild. Unmanicured. It's a haven for snakes and other vermin. And frankly, it's a profound eyesore that is having a significant negative impact on the property values of our community. We have a cohesive, managed aesthetic here, and that weed patch is a blight." I just stared at her, my mouth hanging open. She had just called a pristine natural hay meadow a vital piece of the local ecosystem, a weed patch. My grandfather just looked at her, his expression unreadable. "That meadow has been part of this family's land for 100 years, ma'am. It's going to stay just the way it is." Oh, Brenda's polite facade cracked. "That's a very selfish position to take," she'd snapped. "The needs of the community must be considered." She had stormed off, but not before giving the meadow a look of pure, venomous hatred. A week later, she was back. This time, she came armed with a piece of paper, a crudely drawn map that looked like a child's crayon drawing. She claimed it was a copy of an old historical survey that showed a significant error in the property lines. She claimed that our entire 10-acre South Meadow, the most beautiful part of our property, actually belonged to the HOA as a designated common area. My grandfather listened to her entire rambling, delusional presentation with a look of infinite weary patience. When she was finished, he didn't argue. He just stood up, went to his workshop, and returned with a long cardboard tube. From it, he carefully unrolled a massive, beautiful, and professionally drafted survey map of our property from 1955. It was the official plat, filed with the county, sealed and signed by his own father, who had also been a surveyor, "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "This is the legally recorded survey of my land. And as you can see, the property line is marked by 4 iron survey pins, which I personally inspected and recertified last year. The South Meadow belongs to me. You are mistaken." I thought that would be the end of it. How do you argue with a sealed, legal document presented by the very man whose profession it was to understand it? But I was wrong. The look of pure, narcissistic rage in Brenda's eyes as she left told me that this was not over. She had not just been proven wrong. Her authority had been challenged, and she could not and would not let that stand. The official harassment began. We started receiving official-looking notices of boundary dispute from the HOA. They were legally meaningless, of course, but they were designed to intimidate, to create the illusion of a legitimate legal conflict where none existed. Then, the surveillance started. We'd see Brenda, or her 2 bumbling, self-important HOA patrol cronies, parked at the edge of our property line, taking pictures with long-lens cameras. We saw a drone, a small, buzzing spy in the sky, flying over our meadow, a clear and illegal invasion of our privacy. I was getting scared and angry. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to do something. But my grandfather remained preternaturally calm. "Patience, Leo," he'd said, as he watched the drone on his binoculars. "You always let a wild animal show you its true nature, and all of its tricks before you make your move. Just watch, and you learn." And so we installed our own security cameras, high-definition cameras, covering every inch of our property line, especially the South Meadow. And we waited. The next escalation was a thick, intimidating envelope from the HOA's lawyer. It was a formal, threatening letter. It stated that since we were unwilling to resolve the ongoing boundary dispute in an amicable and neighborly fashion, the HOA would be forced to conduct its own informal, preliminary survey in order to document its historical claim, before they proceeded with a full lawsuit to quiet title. It was a declaration of their intent to trespass. A formal, written announcement that they were planning to break the law. I was furious now, Grandpa. I asked, "Now, do we call the sheriff?" "Not yet, son," he said, a strange, thoughtful look on his face as he reread the letter. "They've just handed us a gift. A written confession of their intent. We'll just wait until they act on it." And then I saw it. The thing that finally made my grandfather's legendary patience begin to fray. He was up early one morning. A few days later, a strange, grim look on his face. He told me to just stay on the porch and watch. I didn't understand, and then I heard it. Strange. Noise coming from the woods. And then I saw him. One of Brenda's goons, walking along our fence line, was a can of bright red spray paint marking the ancient, beautiful oak trees that lined our property with large, ugly red X's. They were marking them for destruction. My grandfather, who had been sitting in his rocking chair, stood up. He walked into the house, and he didn't come back out. He'd seen enough. The snake had shown him its true nature, and that brings us back to that moment. The next afternoon, the moment Brenda and her two cronies, emboldened by our silence, which they had mistaken for fear, finally made their move. They ignored the half-dozen no trespassing signs. They crossed the creek, and they marched into the middle of my grandfather's meadow, armed with their spray paint and their measuring tape, ready to claim our land as their own. And my grandfather, my quiet, patient, deeply methodical grandfather, emerged onto the porch, his old beautiful Winchester in his hands. His voice, that calm, powerful rumble, echoed across the meadow.
Ow!
You have 10 seconds to get off my land. Brenda's reaction was exactly what he had expected. She went from a smug, arrogant invader to a hysterical, screaming victim in the blink of an eye. He's threatening us. She shrieked into the bullhorn, which she had, of course, brought. With her, he has a gun. He's a violent, unstable old man. Call 911. Call the police. The police arrived in minutes, their sirens wailing, expecting to find a dangerous, active shooter situation. They found a scene of surreal, quiet tension. They saw the two trespassers, frozen in the middle of the field, their faces pale with fear. They saw Brenda, on the edge of the property, still screaming into her bullhorn. And they saw my grandfather, standing calmly on his own porch, 100 yards away, his rifle now resting safely in the crook of his arm, its barrel pointed. At the ground, my grandfather didn't wait for them to come to him. He walked with a slow, steady, and confident stride down the hill to meet the sheriff, a man he had known for 30 years. He didn't make a speech, just handed the sheriff a single, thin file folder. Inside that folder was the high-definition, crystal-clear footage from our security cameras. It showed Brenda's goons trespassing the week before, showed the drone flying over our property, showed the man spray painting his trees, and, most damningly, it showed the letter from their own lawyer, the letter that proved that their trespass today was not a mistake, but a premeditated, planned, and formally announced act. The sheriff, a good and honest man, watched the footage on a small portable screen. He read the letter, and his face, which had been tense and worried, hardened into a mask of cold, professional anger. He now understood the full context of the situation. This was not an old man threatening innocent neighbors. This was a property owner on his own land, defending his home against a documented, premeditated, and ongoing campaign of criminal harassment and trespass. He turned to look at Brenda, who was still sputtering about her rights and her safety. And then he looked at my grandfather. "Arthur," he said, his voice now full of a weary respect, "it's your land. And these men are on it, without your permission, after being repeatedly warned. Do you want to press charges?" My grandfather looked at the two goons, who were now pale and terrified, beginning to understand the depth of the trouble they were in. He looked at Brenda, who was now, for the first time, starting to look a little less certain, a little more scared. "Yes." "Sheriff," my grandfather said, his voice calm and clear, "I do." And so, Brenda's two patrol members were arrested for criminal trespass. And Brenda herself, after the sheriff had a long, quiet conversation with the district attorney, was arrested for conspiracy to commit criminal trespass, and for filing a false police report, for having knowingly and maliciously claimed that my grandfather had threatened her. It's a claim that was completely contradicted by the actual events. The HOA was thrown into a state of absolute chaos. Brenda was forced to resign from her presidency in disgrace, facing a mountain of criminal charges and a massive, multi-million-dollar civil suit for harassment that my grandfather had finally decided to file. A few nights later, I was sitting on the porch with my grandfather, the night finally, truly, quiet and peaceful again. "Grandpa," I asked, my voice quiet, The rifle? Were you scared? He looked at me, his eyes clear and steady in the twilight. No, Leo, he said. I wasn't scared. It was just clear. The rifle wasn't about violence. I never would have used it. It was about communication. It was about speaking a language that a bully like Brenda could finally, truly understand. It was a clear, unambiguous, and very loud full stop at the end of a long and very stupid sentence. I had come to the ranch for the summer to build character. I had left the city a boy, convinced that the world could be reshaped with a click. Of a mouse, I would be going back a man. A man who finally understood that some lines are not digital but are drawn in the dirt, and that true strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about quiet resolve, about knowing, with an absolute and unshakable certainty, where your property line is, and having the courage and the conviction to defend it. Brenda and her goons are awaiting trial, and the community is now, for the first time, actually peaceful. But her brother-in-law, a very powerful and very well-connected state senator, has just introduced a new bill to create a new state-level homeowners association boundary dispute and mediation commission, a commission with the unprecedented power to adjust private property lines based on demonstrated community need and historical usage patterns